morning, Vicki, and or good afternoon to where you are right now.
Hey, Amy, always great to see you.
It's great to see you. We've been having a couple of these calls over Zoom, and it's been a great way to stay in touch during this very challenging time of COVID. How are you doing?
We're doing fine. Fortunately, my immediate family's been healthy, and our team is working hard as ever, and we're able to do that pretty efficiently thanks to Zoom and other platforms. So we're hanging in there. How are you?
Good. We're doing well too. The same thing. Very busy with climate work, and but everybody's healthy and safe so far. So thanks for that. Vicki, I did want to spend a few minutes in the beginning to talk about your background, and actually I could spend our entire time together reading your resume. It's very robust, but forgive me for not doing that, but for just a couple highlights. So you're the executive director of the Georgetown Climate Center at Georgetown Law, and you oversee the center's work at the nexus of climate and energy policy, along with mitigation and adaptation at the state and federal levels. You also teach environmental law courses to both law and public policy students, and you serve on the board of advisors of the Institute of Transportation at UC Davis and have testified before the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure on steps that states and cities are taking to reduce greenhouse gas pollution from transportation, and also to make communities more resilient to the serious consequences of climate change. You also helped to develop California's cap and trade system as a member of California's Economic and Allocation Advisory Committee. So a very storied career in working in climate, and I'd love to hear about what's going on with Georgetown Climate Center and how you're working to advance the climate work, and specifically about the Transportation Climate Initiative, or TCI, that Georgetown has been working very strongly on for the last couple of years, I believe.
Yeah, actually longer than that, Amy, but first of all, just thank you for this opportunity. It's always great to connect with my friends at the Climate Registry, and you in particular, from all of our great work together with the states, taking them to the COPs over the years. Really appreciate your partnership. And the Climate Center, as you know, has been around for over a decade, and we were started really by state leaders like Mary Nichols and Gina McCarthy and Lisa Jackson to be in Washington informing the federal dialogue with the lessons from the states and serving as a resource to the states on climate and clean energy. And so we do that in a number of ways. We've worked, of course, on the Clean Power Plan and on legislation, as you mentioned, back in the early days of the climate bills, as well as some of the new ones, which are really exciting that we're seeing some movement again on the Hill. We also work a lot on adaptation to climate change, primarily with cities and also with states. And the Transportation and Climate Initiative is something that we've had the honor of facilitating in this region from the Mid-Atlantic up through New England for some years now. First, really just focusing on what are the opportunities through things like electric vehicles and looking at freight flows and trying to make them more efficient, looking at sustainable community opportunities, transit-oriented development, things like that. But in recent years, really focusing more in earnest on what a regional program might look like, a regional policy where the states really link arms and work together to reduce emissions from this very tricky sector, but obviously it makes sense to handle transportation regionally. And so for some years now, with a vast amount of public input, the states have been working towards a cap and invest program that would cap the emissions from transportation in the sector and provide investment opportunities that the states could work with their own constituents to create to really move the needle on climate and clean energy.
That's wonderful to hear. And there's some interesting developments here in California about addressing the trucking industry in terms of clean vehicles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of the states, and I should say they're bipartisan, actually the leaders, some of the leaders of the Transportation and Climate Initiative are Republican-led states. Massachusetts and Maryland are our chair, respectively. Katie Theoharides is the Secretary of Environment and Energy and Natural Resources in Massachusetts, and Deputy Secretary Earl Lewis in Maryland's Department of Transportation. So that's been, really terrific. And of course, many of these states, as you know, are involved with programs like California's on clean advanced vehicles too.
Wonderful, yes. And so with the TCI, then you've gone through a very rigorous stakeholder process. And so where are you now in the process of trying to achieve this goal of launching this program in that region?
Sure. So the states put out a timeline last year with a draft MOU and have taken public comment. We've actually gotten comment from 10,000 different individuals and organizations. And, most of it's been very positive, really people wanting to see action. Obviously, there's been a real lack of federal action in a positive direction on climate in recent years, and it's really important to really tackle this sector. So we're working with the states to incorporate those comments into design considerations. It's tricky. Nobody's ever done quite what we're trying to do here before. So there's more modeling and analysis underway. To the extent that we can do outreach, that is still going on virtually, of course, both at the state level and at the regional level through things like webinars and opportunities that we take, like this one, really to reach out to other folks, which is happening through the course of the summer. The states did allow for more time, given the fact that the governors, for all the right reasons, of course, are focused on COVID right now. So originally, the idea was to get a final MOU out by spring of this year. And of course, that would be about now or a little bit before. And now we're looking at having the next announcement from the states coming out in the fall.
Well, that's understandable that is delayed, but I'm glad to hear the progress is still happening. And I wanted to also ask you about the adaptation work. Given the same type of challenges that the states and local governments have in terms of resources and attention needed for addressing COVID, what do you think is their ability to move forward on developing and implementing adaptation plans and projects?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question because, as you know, some of the cities are already experiencing cutbacks in their staffing, furloughs, or more even. And, we're aware of certain jurisdictions where people who work on climate and sustainability are being pulled into COVID response. So, clearly that is a challenge. But I will say, one of the things that our organization does, and I know your organization does this as well, is, we really serve as a resource and a platform where states can share best practices even at these difficult times. And, through things like our state policy forum, where adaptation officials from across the country are sharing information in real time about dealing with, for example, climate change and heat that comes from climate change that's, of course, exacerbated in the summer, and COVID, what that means for getting people to safe spaces when, pools and cooling centers might be closed. So I feel like some of these platforms that organizations like ours offer are really important because we're like the connective tissue and support staff, if you will, of some of the cities and states that are really still trying to lead on these issues because climate change and these impacts are not going away. We are seeing tremendous interest in some toolkits that we're putting out on managed retreat, focusing on how states and cities can start talking to people who are vulnerable to, for example, rising seas and coastal storms, thinking about hard questions about whether or not they should consider at some point moving inland, for example. And we're seeing tremendous response to the notices for webinars on topics like that, largely from state and local officials, but from a lot of other practitioners as well. Hundreds and hundreds of people signing up for webinars that we're doing this month on managed retreat and also on equitable adaptation, which of course is also a very hot and important, topic right now in this era where so many of us are focused on the racial injustice that's led to, so much of the protest activity, even with COVID, So I think, as it turns out, this is really a timely time to release these toolkits, and we're having, a tremendous response.
I'm so glad that you're continuing that work, and it's ongoing, and it seems like there's reason to be optimistic that a number of these intersections can be addressed going forward into the post-COVID future. What are your thoughts about any legislation for COVID relief, economic relief, that we're hearing happening in Washington?
Well, the first rounds of COVID relief generally did not address climate and clean energy. There was some, push for that to happen. And probably, unfortunately, that really wasn't integrated in the interest of time and getting relief into the pocketbooks of people and businesses. And, on the other hand, that's understandable. But as somebody who works on climate and knows that this crisis also must be addressed, it's really important to take advantage of those opportunities moving forward with future relief bills. And, we also like to think about this more holistically at the Climate Center. And, we've been in discussions for years now with people, as I mentioned earlier on the Hill, in the relevant committees that are advancing climate legislation, either substantive climate bills like the Clean Energy Standard Bill that just was released yesterday by Congresswoman DeGette, or the bill proposed by the Energy and Commerce Committee, or the report that was issued last week by the Select Committee that has a variety of options that really should be undertaken by Congress and the next administration on climate. So, there's a lot of activity, very much the transportation bills and the infrastructure conversations that are happening with the Moving Forward Act. For example, a significant amount of money is in that bill for transportation resilience, but also on greenhouse gas reporting and more. So we are seeing some progress. It's not necessarily going to happen this year given the election and COVID, but I think what's been important historically on legislation is, putting a marker down and really being ready when the moment is right to move that legislation and to have all the good ideas that you can really on the table and out there. So it's really important not to give up engaging around those. One of the things that we've done is to keep the states engaged in those conversations. And I know you've had Julie on the show, and the Climate Alliance does that as well.
Correct. Well, it was wonderful to talk to you today, Vicki. And I'm just wondering, as we get to the end of our time together, if you could share any of your thoughts or ideas about what gives you hope during this time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you're asking me today, because I have to say, yesterday, after looking at my Twitter feed, and I'm brand new on Twitter, I don't know why I thought this was a good time to get on. It can be pretty depressing to see all the news of the day, not just on climate and the science, what's happening in the Arctic and more, the racial justice issues that we're going through as a country right now, and of course the COVID crisis. So some days it's hard to find that silver lining, but I will say I do think that the public support that we're seeing, the people really stepping out in the streets for social justice, for environmental justice, for climate change action is really heartening. And a lot of that, of course, is being driven by young people, which I'm really thrilled about as a teacher and as a mom. And the other thing that gives me hope is that every day I get to work with the states and the cities that want to be leaders on this very important topic. They're on the front lines of the crisis, and they're seeing the impacts, and they're not giving up even despite COVID, and they're working very hard and really leaning into it. So I'm really grateful, and I'm really looking forward to a time when we can work as much with our federal partners again as we have done in the past to really advance more comprehensive policies as well.
Right, I agree wholeheartedly. And after the night, there is the dawn, and I share your hopes that it is a one that is filled with new energy and advancement in terms of protecting people and the environment. And I look forward to continuing our work together to achieve that goal.
I do too. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's fun to see you.
It's great to see you too. Thanks, Vicki. Bye.
Bye-bye.